The light of sunset cast long shadows across the Montana prairie as Lillian Fairchild knelt by the flowing creek, her shaking hands desperately trying to wash away the blood that stained her dress. The year was 1876, and at 22, she had never imagined she would find herself alone in the wilderness, miles from the nearest settlement, with nothing but the haunting memory of gunshots echoing in her mind. Her family's wagon had been attacked 3 days prior. Bandits had ambushed them on their journey west, killing her father and brother, stealing their valuables, and leaving Lillian to flee into the wilderness. She had been running ever since, following the creek in hopes of finding civilization. The water ran cold between her fingers as she scrubbed at the fabric, her eyes welling with tears. The creek had become her lifeline, providing water to drink and a path to follow. But as dusk descended, bringing with it the eerie sounds of wildlife awakening for the night, fear crept up her spine. That's when she heard the steady rhythm of hoofbeats approaching from behind. Lillian froze, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't dare turn around, terrified the bandits had tracked her. The hoofbeats slowed to a stop. She heard the creak of leather as someone dismounted. "Miss." A deep voice called out, "Are you all right?" Slowly, Lillian turned, her heart pounding against her ribs. A tall man stood before her, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but his stance wasn't threatening. A bay horse grazed nearby, and she could make out the silhouette of a rifle in its saddle holster. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, removing his hat to reveal a weathered face with kind eyes. He wasn't much older than her, perhaps 26, with sun-browned skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Name's Preston Keller. I'm riding for the Double J Ranch." Lillian remained silent, uncertain whether to trust this stranger. Preston took a careful step forward. "It's not safe out here, especially for a lady alone. Nightfall's coming quick and this territory sees mountain lions and wolves." He glanced at her blood-stained dress. "You're hurt." "It's not my blood," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "My family, they were killed, bandits." His expression darkened. "I'm sorry to hear that." He paused, looking around at the darkening landscape. "My ranch is about 2 hours' ride from here. You'll walk back beside me. I can offer you shelter, food, and safety for the night." It wasn't a request, nor was it demanding. It was a simple statement of fact. She needed help, and he was offering it. Lillian hesitated, weighing her options. Stay alone by the creek as night fell, or trust this stranger who at least appeared decent. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked, her voice stronger than she felt. Preston's lips curved in a slight smile. "You don't, but I give you my word as a man who was raised right that no harm will come to you under my protection." He extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Lillian took it, allowing him to help her to her feet. "Thank you, Mr. Keller." "Preston," he corrected, leading her to his horse. "And you are Lillian Fairchild." Preston helped her onto his horse before taking the reins and beginning to lead the animal along the creek bank. True to his word, Lillian walked back beside him, watching his profile in the fading light and wondering what kind of man he truly was. The journey to the Double J Ranch passed in relative silence. Occasionally, Preston would point out landmarks or warn Lillian of uneven ground ahead. As they walked, she observed him surreptitiously, the confident way he moved, the gentle manner in which he guided his horse, the vigilant scanning of their surroundings. "How far are we from the nearest town?" Lillian finally asked, breaking the long silence. "Liberty Gulch is about a day's ride south," Preston replied. "It's small but growing, has a general store, a saloon, even got a proper doctor last year." "I need to get there," Lillian said firmly. "I have an aunt in California who will take me in, but I need to send her a telegram first." Preston nodded. "I can take you to town tomorrow. Tonight, you need rest and a proper meal." As the last light faded from the sky, the silhouette of buildings appeared on the horizon. The Double J Ranch was larger than Lillian had expected. A main house, a bunkhouse, stables, and several other outbuildings spread across the land. As they approached, a dog began barking, alerting the household to their arrival. A weathered man with gray hair emerged from the main house, a lantern in hand. "Preston, that you boy? We were starting to worry." "It's me, Jacob," Preston called back. "Found someone who needs our help." Jacob held the lantern higher, his eyes widening when he spotted Lillian. "Well, I'll be." "Bring her in, bring her in. Martha will want to fuss over her." Inside the main house, Lillian was introduced to Jacob Johnson, the owner of the Double J, and his wife Martha, a kind-faced woman who immediately took charge of the situation. "You poor dear," Martha exclaimed, ushering Lillian toward the washroom. "Let's get you cleaned up and into some fresh clothes. I have some things that might fit you. They belonged to our daughter before she married and moved to Denver." While Lillian bathed and changed, she could hear the men's voices through the door, Preston explaining how he'd found her, Jacob expressing outrage at the bandits who had attacked her family. "Third attack this month," Jacob was saying. "Sheriff needs to organize a proper posse." "I told her I'd take her to town tomorrow," Preston replied. "She's got family in California." When Lillian emerged in a borrowed dress, her hair still damp but clean, she found a hot meal waiting at the table. As she ate, she shared the details of the attack, her voice sometimes faltering but growing stronger as she continued. "They came out of nowhere," she explained. "My father tried to defend us, but there were 5 of them. My brother Thomas, he was only 16. She paused, fighting back tears. "I ran when they told me to. Thomas bought me time to escape." Martha reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're safe now, child." Jacob cleared his throat. "Preston will take you to Liberty Gulch tomorrow. You can send your telegram and take the stage when it comes through." That night, Lillian slept in a real bed for the first time since the attack. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, interrupted by nightmares of gunshots and her brother's face. During one such awakening, she heard soft footsteps in the hallway outside her door, Preston checking on the household, she realized, keeping watch over everyone's safety. The thought brought a strange comfort, and eventually she drifted into a deeper sleep. Morning came with the sounds of a working ranch roosters crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, men calling to each other as they began their day's work. Lillian, dressed in clothes Martha had laid out for her, a simple skirt and blouse that had belonged to their daughter. At breakfast, Preston announced, "I'll be taking Miss Fairchild to town today." "Take the wagon," Jacob instructed, "and keep your eyes open. Those bandits could still be in the area." An hour later, Lillian found herself seated beside Preston in a buckboard wagon, a rifle resting between them as they traveled the dusty road toward Liberty Gulch. The morning was clear and bright, the vast Montana landscape stretching out around them. "Thank you," Lillian said after they had been traveling a while, "for everything." Preston kept his eyes on the road. "No need for thanks, anyone would have done the same." "No," she countered, "not anyone, there are men who would have." She couldn't finish the thought. Preston glanced at her, understanding in his eyes. "Well, I'm not one of those men." As they traveled, Preston told her about the Double J Ranch, how Jacob Johnson had taken him in as a young boy after his own parents died of fever, raising him alongside his daughter. He'd worked his way up from stable boy to ranch hand to foreman, eventually becoming like a son to the Johnsons. "Jacob says he's going to leave the ranch to me someday," Preston explained. "Says his daughter never cared much for ranching life anyway." Lillian found herself sharing her own history in Return Her Life in St. Louis, her father's decision to head west to start a new life after her mother's death, the long journey that had ended so tragically. "I was supposed to be married," she admitted, "back in St. Louis. But I couldn't go through with it. He was my father's business partner, much older than me. When I refused, Father decided we should head west for a fresh start." Preston was silent for a moment. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to unexpected paths. They arrived in Liberty Gulch just before noon. The town consisted of one main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, a livery stable, and at the far end, a modest church. Preston helped Lillian down from the wagon. The telegraph office is inside the general store. I need to pick up some supplies and check in with the sheriff about those bandits. Meet you back here in an hour, Lillian nodded, suddenly feeling vulnerable at the prospect of being left alone. Preston seemed to sense her anxiety. No one in this town will bother you, he assured her, but if you're worried, I can accompany you first. No, I'll be fine, she insisted, straightening her shoulders. Thank you. The telegrapher charged her for a message to her aunt in Sacramento, promising that it would go out on the next wire. When she explained her situation, he informed her that the next eastbound stage wouldn't arrive for 3 days. 3 days, Lillian echoed, dismayed. Where would she stay for 3 days? She had almost no money left. Outside the telegraph office, she collided with Preston, who had just emerged from the sheriff's office across the street. "Whoa there," he said, steadying her with his hands on her arms. "Everything all right?" "The stage won't arrive for 3 days," she explained. "I don't have enough money for the hotel for that long." Preston considered this. "You're welcome to stay at the Double J until then. Martha would be pleased to have female company." Relief washed over Lillian. "Are you certain?" "I don't want to impose." "It's no imposition. Besides, it might not be safe for you in town alone. The sheriff says those bandits have been hitting isolated homesteads and travelers. They haven't been caught yet." As they gathered supplies from the general store, Lillian became aware of curious glances from the townspeople. Preston greeted several by name, introducing Lillian simply as Miss Fairchild, a guest of the Johnsons. They were loading the last of the supplies into the wagon when a commotion erupted from the saloon. 3 men stumbled out onto the boardwalk, clearly intoxicated despite the early hour. One of them spotted Lillian and nudged his companions. "Well, look at that pretty little thing," he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You new in town, darlin'." Preston's posture instantly changed, his body tensing as he stepped slightly in front of Lillian. "Move along, Harley. You're drunk." The man called Harley swaggered toward them, his friends trailing behind. "Aw, don't be like that, Keller. Just being friendly to the lady." His gaze fixed on Lillian, who felt a chill at the recognition in his eyes. "Have we met before, miss? You look mighty familiar." Lillian's blood ran cold. Though she couldn't be certain in his inebriated state, something about this man's face tugged at her memory, the crooked nose, the scar along his jaw. "Had he been one of the bandits who attacked her family, we've never met," she said firmly, though her voice wavered. Preston's hand moved to rest on his holstered pistol. "I said move along, Harley. The lady doesn't want to talk to you." Tension crackled in the air as Harley and Preston stared each other down. Finally, one of Harley's companions tugged at his arm. "Come on, Harley. Let's get another drink." Harley spat on the ground near Preston's boots. "Another time, Keller." His eyes lingered on Lillian. "See you around, darlin'." As the men retreated to the saloon, Lillian released a shaky breath. I think he might have been one of them, one of the men who attacked my family." Preston's expression hardened. "Are you sure?" "No, not entirely, but there was something about his face." She shuddered. "Can we leave, please?" They departed Liberty Gulch immediately, Preston driving the wagon at a brisk pace, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. They had traveled perhaps half the distance back to the ranch when Preston suddenly pulled the wagon off the road, guiding it into a copse of trees. "What is it?" Lillian whispered, alarmed. "Riders coming up fast behind us," Preston said quietly, reaching for his rifle. "Could be nothing, but I don't like it. Stay down and stay quiet." Lillian crouched in the wagon bed as Preston positioned himself among the trees, rifle at the ready. Minutes later, 3 riders galloped past on the road Harley and his companions from town. "They're following us," Lillian whispered once they had passed. Preston nodded grimly. "I'm thinking you were right about recognizing him. We'll wait here a while, then take a different route back to the ranch." They remained hidden for nearly an hour before Preston deemed it safe to continue. Instead of returning to the main road, he guided the wagon through a series of valleys and dry creek beds, taking a circuitous route back to the Double J. The sun was setting by the time they arrived. casting long shadows across the ranch yard. Jacob and two ranch hands rushed out to meet them, concern evident on their faces. "We were getting worried," Jacob said. "What happened?" As Preston explained the situation, Jacob's expression grew increasingly grim. "Harley Tanner and his gang. They've been suspected of the recent attacks, but the sheriff hasn't had proof." He turned to Lillian. "If you recognized him, you might be the witness the sheriff needs." "But that would put her in danger," Preston argued. "They've already followed us once if they know she can identify them." "Which is why she'll stay here until the sheriff can organize a proper posse," Jacob declared. "We'll send word to him tomorrow." That night, the ranch was on high alert. Extra men were assigned to watch duty, and Preston insisted on sleeping in the main house rather than the bunkhouse, positioning himself in the parlor where he could monitor both entrances. Unable to sleep, Lillian came downstairs after midnight to find Preston still awake, cleaning his rifle by lamplight. "You should be resting," he said without looking up. "I can't sleep," she admitted, sitting in a nearby chair. "Every time I close my eyes, I see my brother's face. And now Harley's too." Preston set aside his rifle and looked at her, his face softened by the lamplight. "I'm sorry about your family, Lillian, truly." "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything you've done. Most men wouldn't have stopped to help a stranger." "I'd like to think I'm not most men," he replied with a small smile. They talked quietly for hours, sharing stories from their lives. Preston told her about his dreams of expanding the Double J someday, perhaps breeding horses as well as cattle. Lillian spoke of her love of reading and how she had once hoped to become a teacher. "You still could," Preston pointed out. "Life doesn't end because one path is closed." As dawn approached, Lillian finally felt her eyelids growing heavy. Preston insisted on escorting her back to her room, pausing at her door. "Try to get some rest," he said softly. "I'll be right downstairs if you need anything." The next few days fell into a pattern. A message was sent to the sheriff, who promised to organize a posse but was delayed by other duties. Lillian remained at the ranch, gradually becoming part of its daily rhythm. Martha taught her to make sourdough bread and preserve vegetables from the garden. Jacob showed her how to fish in the creek that ran through the property, the same creek where Preston had found her, and Preston. Preston was always nearby, teaching her to ride, showing her the boundaries of the ranch, making her laugh with stories of cowboy mishaps. In the evenings, they would often sit on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. On her 5th day at the Double J, Lillian realized with a start that she was falling in love with Preston Keller. The realization came as they rode along the creek, Preston pointing out a family of deer drinking from the water. "Beautiful, aren't they?" he asked, his voice hushed, but Lillian wasn't looking at the deer. She was watching Preston's profile, the way the sunlight caught in his dark hair, the gentle curve of his smile. "Yes," she whispered, "beautiful." He turned and caught her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. For a moment she thought he might say something, might acknowledge whatever was growing between them. But the moment was broken by the sound of a distant gunshot. Preston immediately tensed, reaching for his rifle. That came from the direction of the ranch. They rode back at a gallop, arriving to find the ranch hands gathered in the yard. One of them had shot at a coyote threatening the chicken coop. The danger was minor, but the moment of connection between Lillian and Preston had passed. That evening, a rider arrived from town. The sheriff had organized his posse and needed Lillian to come to Liberty Gulch the following day to identify Harley Tanner. The stage was due the day after, which would allow her to continue her journey to California once her testimony was given. The news should have brought relief, but instead Lillian felt a weight settle in her chest. Her time at the Double J, her time with Preston, was coming to an end. At dinner, Martha noticed her subdued mood. "Are you worried about tomorrow, dear? Preston and Jacob will be with you." "You'll be perfectly safe." "It's not that," Lillian admitted. I've come to feel at home here." Martha exchanged a knowing glance with Jacob. Well, there's no need to rush off to California if you don't want to. You're welcome to stay as long as you like. Later that night, Lillian found Preston on the porch staring out at the star-filled sky. She sat beside him on the wooden bench, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked. "I suppose I have to be," she replied. "I owe it to my father and Thomas to see justice done." Preston nodded. "The sheriff's a good man. He'll make sure Tanner and his gang face consequences." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the chorus of night insects and the occasional call of an owl. Finally, Lillian gathered her courage. "Preston, I wanted to thank you for everything these past few days. You've made me feel safe when I thought I'd never feel safe again." He turned to her, his eyes serious in the dim light. "You don't have to thank me, Lillian. Having you here has been." He paused, seeming to search for the right word. "It's been a gift." Their gazes held, and Lillian felt herself leaning toward him almost unconsciously. Preston hesitated, then closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a gentle kiss. When they parted, Lillian's heart was racing. Preston rested his forehead against hers, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I've been wanting to do that for days," he confessed softly. "Why didn't you?" she whispered. "Because you've been through so much, you're still grieving. I didn't want to take advantage." Lillian placed her hand over his. "You could never take advantage, Preston. What I feel for you, it's real, despite everything or maybe because of it." They stayed on the porch for hours, talking and sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence, their hands entwined. Preston spoke of his hopes for the future, and for the first time, Lillian allowed herself to imagine being part of that future. The journey to Liberty Gulch the next day was tense. Preston rode beside the wagon where Lillian sat with Jacob, all three vigilant for any sign of trouble. The town was buzzing with activity when they arrived. The sheriff had gathered a dozen men for his posse, and news of the bandits' potential capture had drawn crowds. Sheriff Miller, a grizzled man with a stern demeanor, greeted them outside his office. "Miss Fairchild, thank you for coming. I understand this must be difficult for you." Inside, Lillian provided a detailed description of the attack and identified Harley Tanner from a lineup of men the sheriff had assembled. Tanner, sober now and sullen, glared at her with undisguised hatred. "You're making a mistake, lady," he growled as deputies led him away. "My boys won't let this stand." "Ignore him," Sheriff Miller advised. "We've got him dead to rights and his gang won't be far behind." "Now, about getting you safely to that stage tomorrow. Actually," Lillian interrupted, glancing at Preston, "I've decided to stay in the area a bit longer." Preston couldn't hide his smile, and even Jacob looked pleased. After finishing their business with the sheriff, they stopped at the general store for supplies. As Preston loaded their purchases into the wagon, Lillian heard her name called from across the street. Lillian Fairchild. A young woman was hurrying toward her, her face alight with recognition. It took Lillian a moment to place her Rebecca Wilson, a childhood friend from St. Louis. "Rebecca, what on earth are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same," Rebecca exclaimed, embracing her. "My husband and I moved here last year. He's the new doctor. But Lillian, everyone thinks you're dead." There was a report of the Fairchild wagon being attacked, no survivors found. Lillian's stomach dropped. "No one knew I escaped." "But Rebecca, my aunt in California—" "Oh, Lillian," Rebecca's face fell. "I'm so sorry. Your Aunt Margaret passed away last winter, influenza. It was in the papers back home." The news hit Lillian like a physical blow. Her aunt, her last living relative, was gone. Her carefully laid plans crumbled around her. Preston, sensing her distress, appeared at her side. "Is everything all right?" Through her shock, Lillian made the introductions, explaining how she and Rebecca knew each other. When she shared the news about her aunt, Preston's arm came around her shoulders, steady and supportive. "You're not alone, Lillian," he said firmly. "You have a place with us for as long as you want it." That evening, back at the Double J, Lillian sat by the creek where Preston had found her, trying to process everything that had happened. The loss of her aunt meant she truly had no family left, nowhere she was expected, no one waiting for her. Preston found her there as the sun began to set, sitting beside her without speaking, his presence a comfort in itself. "I'm not sure what to do now," Lillian finally admitted. "All my plans were centered around reaching my aunt." "What do you want to do?" Preston asked simply. Lillian looked at him, really looked at him, this man who had saved her in more ways than one, who had shown her kindness when she needed it most, who made her heart race with just a smile. "I want to stay," she whispered. "Here with you, if that's what you want too." Preston took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Lillian, I've known since I found you by this creek that you were someone special. These past days have only confirmed what my heart already knew." He took a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you. I know it's fast, maybe too fast after everything you've been through," but Lillian silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her emotions into it: gratitude, hope, and yes, love. "It's not too fast," she assured him when they parted. "Some things you just know." 2 weeks later, news reached the Double J that Sheriff Miller's posse had captured the remaining members of Harley Tanner's gang. Justice had been served for Lillian's family, bringing her a measure of peace she hadn't thought possible. By then, she had fully integrated into life at the ranch. Martha was teaching her to manage the household accounts, and Jacob had discovered she had a knack for working with the young horses. In the evenings, she would read aloud from books borrowed from Rebecca, Preston listening contentedly as they sat by the fire. On a perfect autumn day, with the aspen trees turning gold along the creek banks, Preston took Lillian riding to a beautiful overlook on the ranch property. As they dismounted to admire the view, he suddenly dropped to one knee before her, taking her hand in his. "Lillian Fairchild, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I feel like I've known you all my life. You are the bravest, strongest woman I've ever met, and I fall more in love with you each day." He pulled a small ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a single pearl. "Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here, make this ranch our home, create a family together?" Tears of joy sprang to Lillian's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Preston Keller, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, Lillian thought about the twisting path that had brought her here, the tragedy, the fear, the moment by the creek when a kind cowboy had appeared like an answer to an unspoken prayer. "You'll walk back beside me," he had said that first day, offering her protection when she needed it most. Now she would walk beside him for the rest of their lives, not just in need of his protection, but as his partner, his equal, his love. The path ahead might not always be easy, but they would face it together, step by step, side by side. In the spring of 1877, Preston and Lillian were married in the small church in Liberty Gulch, surrounded by their friends and neighbors. Jacob stood as Preston's best man, Martha wept happy tears, and Rebecca served as Lillian's maid of honor. As they exchanged vows, Lillian thought of her father and brother, wishing they could see her happiness, believing somehow that they knew. The Double J Ranch flourished under their joint care. Preston's dreams of breeding horses became reality, with Lillian developing a special talent for training them. 2 years after their wedding, they welcomed their first child, a son they named Thomas Jacob Keller, in honor of Lillian's brother and the man who had become like a father to them both. Life in the Montana Territory wasn't always easy, but it was good. And each evening, no matter how busy their day had been, Preston and Lillian would walk down to the creek at dusk, hand in hand, remembering where their story had begun and giving thanks for the love they had found amid loss and hardship. For Lillian, who had once been alone in the world, the greatest gift was never having to be alone again.